really right now, what we've implemented, as I'm calling it, is it's really, I got the red slippers because, I have the keys to making this implement for the rest of construction, because this was really only part of construction, the rest of construction. And then we can do software, indirect. I mean, I don't think, to your point, no one had the vision of that when this started. When it started, it was, we're just going to do this is, this is what we have. And after I started working with you and your team and started seeing the capabilities, my mind was blown. It was like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't just, we don't, hey, look at all these tools that I don't need anymore,
Yeah.
intake, things of that nature. And so, for me, it really enabled me to see that there were really other ways that we could utilize both Rio and Procurement Gateway.
Today, with the great pleasure of being joined by Shellie Molina. She is the CPO and head of supply chain at Lumen Technologies. Shellie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
I'm intrigued by your career path because there are a lot of leaders that come into procurement without supply chain, and there are some procurement leaders who enter supply chain, and then there's often some confusion around the difference between them. But your career has spanned the whole thing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now?
Sure, happy to. Well, I got a degree in finance because I actually thought I was going to be a banker. I thought that was what I was going to do. And when I was interviewing for jobs, every single job was for sales, selling insurance, selling mutual funds, whatever. And I was mortified of selling. I think I might have been traumatized selling Girl Scout cookies or something, but I just absolutely was like, there's no way I'm going to be in sales. And one of my good friends, she was working at a spinoff in this new industry back in the day in electronics for contract manufacturing. And she said, hey, we have a buyer position open. And I'm like, I can buy anything. What would I be buying? And she's like, I don't know, like electronic stuff. Great, sign me up. It's not
It's
sales,
not
that's
sales.
right.
Let's
And
go.
so, and it was literally for half the money too. Let's be clear. I could have taken a job that paid me twice as much, but I was that scared of sales that I just was like, nope, I need to buy things instead. And what was really good about this job is that it was a startup. Everything was by hand. So I would get a green bar paper that the planner would write on to tell me what to buy, because apparently I wasn't smart enough to read the page, but
Uh-oh.
she would handwrite what I needed to buy. I would then go to my filing cabinet and have cardstock buy cards.
Yeah.
And that was how, and then I hand typed purchase orders. I was fast at 10 key and boy, I was a good typer. That taught me so much about how everything ran, how everything worked, right? And it was a fantastic entry level position that really got me to understand how the system worked, if you will. And it wasn't a system, it was all paper. But the other thing is that I was brand new. I was right out of college and it was a startup. It wasn't doing great. So the senior buyer decided to retire. I'm the only buyer. And the people who really trained me were those salespeople.
Huh.
And they were the ones that gave me the ideas of, hey, if you put this on a contract, you don't have to call every week and buy more stuff. We can do releases, right? So they really trained me how to be a buyer, to be totally honest. They also introduced me to another company, much larger, that didn't do things with paper, and introduced me to that procurement leader. And so after, couple years, I moved about 90 miles away from my home and started a job with a larger contract manufacturer. And they were much bigger. I remember my first day on the job, the guy was walking me around, my peer, and he was telling me, very frustrating, that the POs print overnight in a batch job. Well,
Hmm.
he did not see me doing a happy dance, which meant I didn't have to hand type POs anymore. I was thrilled. So they had a homegrown MRP system. And, this is back in the day, so I'm, of course, dating myself, but I learned how to program in Lotus.
Yeah.
And so I wrote code on
I
how to
remember
transform,
Lotus.
yeah, exactly, how to transform the PR to PO so it would happen automatically. Again, I had a master contract. Here's my
Yeah.
PR. As long as my PR matched, so I could do like 1,000 POs in a day.
Nice.
And so I got that all done. I got that desk clean. It was the distribution desk, the disty desk, as we called it. And my boss was so thrilled. He's like, well, we're going to move you to another account desk. And it was a mess. And I remember the lady that had it, she worked 12 hours a day. And I thought I was being punished. Like I was kind of crying to my boss, like, why are you moving me to this desk? I like my desk. And
I
he's like, well,
just cleaned
because
this up.
yeah, exactly. He's like, well, I need you to do it again. So I spent the next couple months coding in Lotus, getting it all together. And then what ended up happening is I got it so clean that I was done by like Tuesday at like noon. So, and idle hands does not work well for me. So, as it turned out, the planner for this desk that I had, she was going to go on maternity leave. So I volunteered and I said, hey, I'll learn how to plan. She can teach me how to plan and I'll learn how to plan. And so I learned how to do the planning that impacted all my work. And I partnered with the operations leader. And we actually took the delivery performance for that client from like 60% to 90%. And our inventory went down.
Love it.
And so it was an amazing experience. And so one of my mentors, of course, at the time I didn't know was a mentor, but he really was. He mentioned to me, hey, we have this production operations job open, manager job open. You should apply. And as any young professional, I said, well, I don't have experience in that. And he said, I realize that. I still think you should apply. And we
You-
argued for a little bit. And he was like, Shellie, apply for the job. So I applied for the job. Of course, I got it. And so it allowed me to then learn how production worked. So I was on the floor understanding capacity planning. I had to go back to my college school books before the internet,
yeah.
going through the school book on how to do a capacity plan. So again, my friend Lotus, do this whole capacity planning to understand that the lines I were running were never going to catch up. We were never going to be on time. And I didn't have enough people. It was a whole bunch of problems. So I remember walking into the general manager's office saying, I need to hire 70 people. With all this data though, I had like the full plan. I need this many, it'll go up here, we'll do this, it'll taper down, but you're going to end up needing this number at the end, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, my God, if that'll make people stop calling me and expediting and getting off my back, by God, you've got it. So it was a wonderful experience. I went to the Lean Institute, really got an amazing opportunity at that job. So much so that the client I had worked for that we had increased the on-time delivery, he had left his job and he sought me out and recruited me to work for a company, which is now Honeywell, but it was Allied Signal at the time in Kansas, to actually manage the contract manufacturers. They were doing a big outsourcing event and they needed somebody who understood how contract manufacturing worked, which of course was my wheelhouse. So we got all that,
Yeah.
I joined that company, got all that done. I was with Honeywell for 15 years, Lean certified, black belt, green belt, ran the warehousing, had a wonderful career at Honeywell, a fantastic base to learn everything about supply chain and procurement. Had an opportunity while I was there to also work for the CEO. So I got a lot of really great experience, a lot of learnings with that, role. He left Honeywell and went to be the CEO of First Solar, and I ended up following him there. And that was a really great experience, and was head of supply chain and procurement, which also included a very large construction business as we were also building utility scale solar plants. So that gave me a whole different appreciation for the construction business. So it was a great foundation. One of the unique things about First Solar, which was amazing to me, was high tech. It was basically building a very big semiconductor, just a
Yeah.
very large solar panel. Most everybody had come from Intel. Everything was built with robots. This is back in 2012. So all of my material handling was robots moving everything around. So, I think about 2012 to where we are now and how we were using robots then. But
Yeah.
fantastic experience, learned a whole lot there. Then took a short stint at a private equity owned company, was a COO there for a little bit, kind of helped them do their automation, work with China, things like that. But then I took a sharp left turn and joined a professional services company called Genpact, which now they're pretty much an AI company, which meant I was in sales. So I faced my greatest fear and
Nice work.
was a lead client partner for the aerospace and defense segment for about 5 years, and had a great time. But boy, did I miss the action of owning the transformations, of owning what needed to be done in an organization and truly leading people and leading the transformation. So when I saw this job open at Lumen, and this is an interesting story for folks out there because I didn't know anyone at Lumen, but I knew the Lumen name for other reasons. I won't go into that right now, but it is a funny story. But on LinkedIn, CPO position popped up. I immediately applied and I knew no one. However,
Huh.
this is where your network comes in, friends. The CEO and at the time, the chief revenue officer both worked at GE. And I had the
Hmm.
opportunity to network with GE when I was at First Solar. And so I knew some people and they happened to have known the chief revenue officer. And all I said was, can you just have my resume looked at? And that's what they did, and had that opportunity, went through several rounds of interviews. And the interviewing process was really fun because the number one thing that kept coming up over and over again was, how do you lead change? How do you deal with difficult people? And how do you hit your numbers? And that was almost every interview. And here I am now, a little over a year and a half, and I've hit all my numbers. I've made some massive changes, and it's been a pretty fun, 35 plus years.
Well, and massive, massive transformation while you're at it. The scope and scale of the change that you've led, the transformation that you've led, it's the kind of thing that makes most folks turn tail and run. But you ran into it. And there's something really remarkable, and I really appreciate, Shellie, the way that you lead. You hold people to those high standards to make sure that you hit your numbers, and treating people in a way, even when they're being held to account, that they fundamentally leave feeling good, feeling motivated. And that way that you bring the leadership style that leaves people excited to work really hard with you. And I think there's something really, really powerful in that. Through your career, I imagine you've learned a few things to help shape that in you. I know on my heart, there are a lot of people in the world that would benefit from more examples of leaders like you that leave the world better than you found it and leave people feeling good about it along the way, even through hard conversations.
Well, I think you learn just as much from bad leaders than you do good leaders. I've had my share of bad leaders, and I learned a lot. Like, I don't want to behave like that. And then I've had wonderful mentors, and I was really fortunate, honestly, when I was at Honeywell, I had a coach, and it was fantastic. I always knew I was in trouble when he would say, I need to see you after a meeting. But I became kind of a whisperer of some leaders that were very difficult. And, I think at the end, I just see myself as a girl from Tucson, and I treat people, how I want to be treated. But I know that, typically people want to share the same goals and objectives. So I'm very transparent. People usually always know where they stand, good, bad, or indifferent, they'll know. And I'm very forthcoming with, this is where we're going.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to get there. I think people, the number one thing that people hate is uncertainty. And I think what I bring to a lot of my roles is some certainty. We're going to go there. We might not go in a straight line. It may be curvy, but that's the direction we're going. And I support people. I think that's the other thing is I have people's backs. I was just in India. As you know, we just did this very large ERP implementation moving to S4. And we had a very surprise, oh my gosh, we need to have this interface with this one system tool, etc. Literally, it happened in like February, and we're going live in May. And A lot of drama, lot of drama. And it's a week before go live, and the team basically says, we can't go live. Like, we're not ready. And I, my response was not screaming. My response was, it's okay. I got your back. The rest of the project is going to go live.
Yeah.
This portion of work won't get done, but it's okay.
Yeah.
And when I was in India, the two leaders there, they basically said that was so comforting, and how I led them through that, oh, by the way, they were just fine. And it went live, and their portion went live with the rest of the project. So how you can motivate people by, ensuring that you do have their back, and that you understand what they're going through. I think that's the other piece that does make it nice. For my variety of things that I've done, I can pretty much connect the dots, and something that I've had happen to me in my past that allows me to say, all right, this is sort of like this, does this make sense? The other thing, which I don't think it's unique, but I find it more and more, I just plain have common sense. I do things that make sense, right? And I think that logic and that common sense, sometimes people get so focused on something, they forget to look up. And I find that over the last few years, that's really been my job, is to pull people from looking at what they're working on right here to look up and look at the bigger picture. And I think that's the other reason that people like to work on my teams, is because I include them in that journey. I don't say, oh, you don't need to know that. I'll always tell them the why. This is why we're going to do something. And when we get into the transformation at Lumen, I'll give you some examples on that. But I think that in and of itself is super important.
I mean, it's a great segue, because the having people's back and being clear on where you're going. And I think there's also that common sense of, we're not going to hold up the entire go live for this one piece. We're going. That needs to go on schedule. We're now going to put in place a workaround or figure out that other system just needed, it
Right.
still needed to function, but
Yeah.
there's other sort of sneaker net ways around what you would have liked to have on day one that
Right.
can be managed. And I think
Right.
through that transformation, the
Yeah.
scope and
Yeah.
scale of you volunteering and putting your hand up to say, hey, which, most days, I bet type 2 fun, right? You look back on it and you're like, wow, that was good. You start to gloss over some of the really hard parts. There's so much that you've been able to bring into that. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you think about transformation and how you prepare yourself and the team for the kind of an inevitable bumps and surprises. Get, as ready as you can be, but setting yourself up to be ready to catch the things that nobody planned for.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So,
When I joined Lumen, they had this ERP project going on, and it'd been going on for a good 2 years or so. And they had decided to split it up. They had a phase one and they had a phase two. And coming in as the CPO, it's the biggest project that's going on. I happen to report to finance. So it's the finance piece that's phase one, and I'm involved heavily. And there was a lot of tension between our SI partner and our business team. And I really was in the project more as a mediator, more than anything else. And I could see how things were going. And I knew that phase two was very much around operations and my space, accounts payable, purchasing, warehousing, order to cash, all of that reported to me. And I joke a little bit to say, not that I'm a control freak, but I didn't really like the way that phase one was going. And I felt like if I
Yeah.
volunteered, I'd have a little more control over it. And I went to a couple of my peers and I said, am I crazy for volunteering? And they said, you are absolutely insane. Like, you should run away from this. You should not do this. And I thought, oh boy, okay. In fact, I got that advice from more than one person, but I just felt it in my gut that I needed to do this. And I needed to do it honestly, Sean, for my people, for my team. And that's my motivator, right? My team needed that. So I went to the CFO and volunteered. And I think he also thought I was crazy, but he said, let me think about it, and came back and said, all right, let's go ahead and do this. And I made some immediate changes that I think that folks, when you take on a project of this size that had been going on for now 3 years, there's a lot of extra weight, right? So we had people reporting to people who were just reporting to report. And then you had a meeting that prepped for a meeting that was for another meeting. And so we eliminated like 40 hours of meetings as soon as I took over. And then we actually cut out probably 50% of the project managers. So those were some really big moves, but it allowed me to be right at the team level. And I was present for everything. And that was the other thing that folks could see. I was there. I understood. And, we made a commitment that we would go live May 4th. And everyone kept trying to test that because the previous example, it kept pushing. One thing wouldn't work. We'd push the date. That didn't work. They'd push the date. And in our case, as you know, I mean, you have a significant portion of this project. We put our line in the sand, and you committed to me. We shook hands. Okay, we're going to make it happen. And we knew that in some cases it was going to be bumpy. And
Yep.
I prepared the senior leadership for that. I said, we can go live on this date. It's not going to be pretty. There's going to be some problems, but we can go live. And part of the go live included payroll. And I said there was only one thing that would make me slip, and that's if payroll said they
It's
weren't
kind of
ready,
important.
because pretty important.
Yeah.
But, with the rest of the organization, it was like, we can make this happen. I think I rallied the troops around the fact that they could see I was confident in them. And because my confidence in myself and in them, it gave them confidence. Just like that team on the last week where, that's what they told me in India. They said, you gave us the confidence to finish this. And I think
Yeah.
that that's what was contagious, was kind of the confidence we could make it happen. Now we're, 6 weeks in. We definitely have some challenges, but the teams are rallying, like you can see. Okay, and they're knocking
Yeah.
stuff down, this problem, that problem. Our number one ticket is really training, right? Which, because it's new, which is expected, which made me feel pretty happy. But for the most part, things are functioning, and so I'm really, this will go down as probably one of the proudest projects that I've led.
There's a couple of things that stand out to me. We've both had opportunities to go through significant transformations, and a few things that, if I may, suggest that others can really take away. You mentioned that you were there, and by there, I don't mean like there for an hour for open office, on Fridays. I mean, you were there on the daily calls twice a day or more, and in between digging into escalated issues. And there's a clarity of understanding that you brought to those sessions where you understood what good looked like, and you brought that common sense and all of your background and experience to understand what the implications were. And I think that combination of having finance plus supply chain and procurement meant that when something came up, you weren't wondering whether there were going to be tax implications. You already knew there were going to be tax implications and said, that's okay as long as tax is okay
Yeah,
with it.
yeah,
Or that's okay as long as,
yeah, yeah,
X. And that clarity of understanding plus clarity of instruction of here's the success criteria for you to go own this and close it.
yeah,
I think a lot of other leaders can end up feeling like they're not supposed to get involved, but you didn't micromanage, you clarified what success looks like. There's a
yeah,
really important difference that I think a lot of leaders muddle in that they feel like they're supposed to be more like a director with nose in and hands out or something, but they're actually
yeah,
supposed to be leading and clarifying what the outcomes are. That was one of the things that really stood out, both from the SI, and I know I heard from their feedback that decisions really sped up as you took in, and decisions didn't linger. And I think this was one of the things that helped the whole thing come in on time. Is if a decision landed on your desk, it
yeah,
was not there for a moment longer than it needed to be.
yeah, yeah. Let's double click on that because I do think that is really important. That was part of those meeting structures
Yeah,
and being able to make those decisions. And I think that you're right. When I say present, it didn't mean that I, jumped in to do the work. I didn't, but I was there, and they knew that, and
yeah,
that was what was important. However, I'll just give you an example of something that happened last week. We were spinning on a particular situation, a big backlog of something. One of the issues had to do with access. And so we had all these PRs kind of stuck that needed approval. And I made the decision we're going to approve those right now. And SOX control. I said, yeah, we're going to approve these 6,000 recs right now. Get them to me and to Kelly as an SVP. I have the authority. None of them are past my authority, so let's get them to me. I called my boss and said, oh, by the way, I'll beg for forgiveness. And he said, just call our senior auditor and let him know that you're doing it and document it. And that's what I did. And guess what? But the team would have spun on that had I not been present to be
Yeah.
able to kind of pull them from in the weeds. Okay, common sense. What's the risk if we do this? The risk is like minuscule. Because my first
Yeah.
question was, do you have any data that tells me how many times that someone has actually rejected a PR? And
Pretty
it was
rare.
pretty rare. And so I said,
Yeah.
okay, maybe I approved a couple that they didn't need. It'll be $10. I'm not going to worry about it. And
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things when I say present and being there. But you're right. I'm on the calls in the morning. I'm in the calls in the afternoon. I'm making sure that the guidance is in the right direction. And if someone's going too far down into the weeds, I can pull them up a bit and coach appropriately. Because it's really what you're doing is coaching.
And I think that clarity of what's the real problem here and what's the risk, right? The myopic
Exactly.
focus of, well, the control says it needs to go only to that person, as opposed to there are times in life where you select all approve. It's why the
Yeah.
capability is there. And when there's a whole combination of factors of
Yes.
some data that's migrated and some other factors that all play in, you can go and wade through the weeds, or you can just step up and go, hey, let's just solve
Exactly.
this.
Exactly.
We don't need to make it a grand study. And I think there's courage in that, but it comes from the deeper understanding of what really matters. I think that helps navigate those bumps and surprises.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
And I guess a fun for me is we got to be a part of that and to help bring that layer of orchestration across so many of those things, and in particular in the somewhat strategic, very strategic, in building data centers, building fiber lines, and taking that off of that old custom software onto standard, orchestration and some solutions that our team was able to bring with Rio and our procurement gateway, and being able to bring that. I think one of the things that comes up fairly often is, what is orchestration?
Right.
And I
Exactly.
think that idea of being able to take the spine, the end to end, the backbone of, call it intake to pay, of I need something, I don't entirely know what, maybe it's in a catalog, maybe I need to source it, maybe I need to do something, and then being able to weave that all the way through to the point where the invoice has been approved and paid. And I think that all of the different things that need to happen there, I call it sometimes stitching the pieces together, because ideally you've got a end-to-end flow that makes sense. And then when you have, even if it's 5, 6, 20, 16 different systems to go do something, you can stitch that through contextually for, if it's Tuesday, we use this one. If it's Wednesday, we use that one, or different categories. And I think being able to bite off construction, which I think we both have that appreciation of, this is not trivial, and it's very, very important to Lumen, but being able to have that live, I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve and to help you and the team with that. What would you say have been the most impactful things that you've seen out of that?
Yeah, I think the big thing was again, coming into new company, new terms, right? And they kept talking about bid master this, bid master that. And for our business, we were building, the backbone of the AI economy to data centers, but we were also doing fiber network to the
Yeah.
home. And so that kind of business was super, super, uh, very busy, let's just say that. And really, this bid master was for this particular piece of work. And what they wanted was a replacement to bid master, but more. And so all of those requirements were done before I got here, and all different stuff, in terms of how it interfaced with the project management module of SAP, etc. And so how that all came together was really insightful for me because they really were just focusing on construction. Now, construction is our number one spend, but it really right now, what we've implemented, as I'm calling it, is it's really I got the red slippers because I have the keys to making this implement for the rest of construction because this was really only part of construction, the rest of construction, and then we can do software, indirect. I mean, I don't think, to your point, no one had the vision of that when this started. When it started, it was, we're just going to do this is, this is what we have. And after I started working with you and your team and started seeing the capabilities, my mind was blown. It was like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't just, we don't, hey, look at all these tools that I don't need
Yeah.
anymore. Intake, things of that nature. And so, for me, it really enabled me to see that there were really other ways that we could utilize both Rio and Procurement Gateway. And so I'm really excited to getting this phase of the project stabilized so that you and I can start running faster on how do I get the rest of the categories in there and how do I also eliminate some other software that that will be consolidated. So I'm very excited about that because it's working really really well, and I'm really proud of the fact that your team was able to take a 20-year-old legacy construction business procurement process and make it better than what it was. And I'll tell you again, it was before me, but they looked everywhere, high and dry, to find somewhere that had something off the shelf that supported construction. And they could not find it anywhere. And so I'm grateful to our SI partner that introduced us to you and SAP. From that perspective, because you really have been able to, service that particular piece of the business, but now enabling me to grow and utilize that even more. So I'm really grateful for you and your
Thank you so
team.
much, Shellie. I think that idea that we were able to go take what is typically deployed for those other lines of business, those other categories, and adapt it for some really cool capabilities that you've got of using these
Yeah,
assembly units to more quickly estimate and plan and run the builds,
right.
and to be able to go and create that next level of capability,
Yeah,
and now being able to go and start to get that across the other channels is really really remarkable. And also, again, huge shout out to young woman who I like to call a future CPO, who was able to join us and share some of that
yes,
story recently. So uh,
yeah, she did great. Sean, I want to mention one thing because you told a story about this, and I think it's so critical. You were talking about in Bidmaster, they called a GR
oh, they
something
called it
else, right?
cup.
Goods receipt, something
Yeah.
else. A cup. Oh, we got to do a cup. And you're like, so it's a GR. No, it's a cup, and you go through, and that's the kind of leadership that you have to be able to give is, yes, this is the same.
Yep.
It just happens to be, and so getting people on that same terminology, I think was super helpful. And I appreciate how you guys were able to do that because that was no easy feat. Because, it's got to be this way. Well, it doesn't have to be just
Yeah.
like that. And that's change management, right? Change management
helping
101. So,
helping folks see that the words that they've been using do not mean what they think they meant, but they do to them
right.
because of how they got to where they are now. And you step
That's
into a
right.
different room, and it's just a GR. Uh,
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
I'm really grateful again that that bite-sized first step also was able to be done alongside such a significant transformation for the rest of the business. And I think this is one of the other things that, just like the S4 transformation you did with a phase one, phase two, smaller bite than ginormous bite, and now getting this done across other pieces, getting first bite, next bite, that sense of not biting off more than you can chew and making sure that you've got time to digest it, are some of the ingredients that I think others can take away from what's helped you navigate through this?
For sure, for sure. I think you're right. I do remember it was funny meeting with our CEO, and she had said, well, how is this so much bigger than phase one? That's all. That's we're closing the books. And I looked at her and I'm like, okay, let's
Yeah.
start here. Payroll, entire company, order to cash, make to deploy, P2P, operations. And then she was like, okay, yes, it
Yeah.
is bigger. And then she said, well, what's different? Like, why is there no escalations? What's going on? And Lumen is we are very proud, and I am very proud of our
Yeah.
behaviors. And we've all been trained in the Brene Brown Dare to Lead. And, leadership is a craft and you've got to work at it. And my response to her was very much around, well, all I did was follow our values and our behaviors and our dare to lead principles. And she shrugged her shoulders. She's like, "Well, of course it is. It's leadership." I said, "Yes, it's just it seems easy, but doing it can be, if you do it right, it'll look easy."
It's one of those superpowers that some people put the work in to develop. And I maybe if we close out on that thought of, I like to ask myself the question of what would I like to know? What would I tell myself, or a younger version of myself 10, 20 years ago? And then I also love to think about how I become the person that I would have listened to. Shellie, what
Yeah.
would you want to tell yourself, or a decade ago, or tell an emerging leader that would help them on their journey?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to my coach yesterday, and she kind of asked me, what did you learn? And I said, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to lead this project. I needed the experience to do this. If I were to tell my 20 years ago, it would have been the same thing my coach told me then. Just calm down, just relax. It'll be okay. But I really do think that, the experiences that I had is what allowed me to know when to push, know when to wait. You don't just get that, magically. And I think maybe that's what I would have told my younger self. Like, you're not going to have all the answers and you're going to just grow. And that's really what happened.
I think that idea of giving yourself the grace of the time to go learn, explore, and it is a journey, or
Yeah.
as I love to call it, the never-ending climb. Build a
Yes,
stronger you to leave the world better than you found it. And Shellie,
absolutely.
so grateful for you, for our opportunity to serve you and the team, and for all of you watching. Thanks for listening. This has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. We'll see you next week.